Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Kamma daf Samach. This is the daf for Shabbat. We're going to start at the very bottom of Samach Daled Amud Bet. So we're going to finish up this sugya, and then we're going to go back to something we saw previously. We were talking about two braitot, the darshan timatzeh in two different ways, and then the Gemara asked at the very bottom of the previous daf, "V'ha im himatzeh lahach yudat hamabale lechaditanya." Wait, how can you darshan what we tried to darshan from those two different braitot? Isn't this used for a different drasha? But as it says, yado ein yado. If you steal something and you take it in your hand, so you steal it by taking it in your hand, and then we know you've stolen it, and we can make you liable. Gagol chatzerov karpifo minayin. But what if you have it in your, let's say an animal comes into your courtyard, and then you lock the gate? You didn't actually take it with your hand. How do we know that we can make you liable as well? Talmud Lomar, because it says im himatzeh timatzeh mikom makom. From there, we learn anyway that it's found in your possession. It doesn't have to actually be in your hand. Im kan lemakra. So then now we're back to the original question. How can you darshan himatzeh timatzeh for those other two drashot that we had in the different braitot when we need it for this? Im kan lemakra o himatzeh o timatzeh. Again, we're going to say it's the wording they choose. It could have said, if it wanted to teach you the others, it would have said either himatzeh or timatzeh, and then you would have this double language, but of the same word being used twice. But midashane kra, the fact that they do double language and change it from himatzeh to timatzeh, shma mina tarte, we can actually derive two things. Okay, now we're going to move on to a statement that we saw before, gufa. We're going back in depth into the statement. Amarav. When you go to pay for something that was stolen, and you pay the principal of the item, and you have the additional kefel or the arba v'chamisha payments that we've discussed previously. Now we're going to distinguish here. Rav distinguishes between the keren, the principal, is paid based on the price it was at the time of the theft. So if you change price, you're going to pay by the original price. Whereas the kefel, the double payment, or the 4 or 5 times the payment, is going to be paid when we put you in court and judge you for it. Now, it's a little bit, to be a little fine-tuned here, because arba v'chamisha is actually going to be the value it was at the time that you slaughtered and sold the animal, when you slaughtered it, really, because it has to be when the animal was alive, because you stole a live animal and then you slaughtered a live animal. So obviously it's going to be worth something different once it's dead. So it's not going to really be hamad abedin. It's going to be the moment before you slaughtered it, but not the moment when you stole it. So now we're going to explain. My time of Rav. Where does he get this from? Amar Kra, the pasuk says gneva v'chayim. Okay, what does that mean? Well, the pasuk says imi matzeh timatzeh biyado gneva. If we find the stolen item in your hands, mishor ad chamor atzeh, right? Whichever kind of animal it is. Chayim, when they're alive. Shnayim yishaneh. So now why does it say the word chayim? It's here to darshan it. What do we darshan here? Well, it says gneva and it says chayim. Amai kamar achman chayim b'gneva. Why does it say alive in the gneva? Achaye lekeren ke'en sheganav. What we basically use this word is revive the principle to be what it was at the time of the theft. And that's how they use the word chayim here, not in its simple reading as the animal should be alive, but revive the amount that you owe to be the way it was back then. Amar Rav Sheshet. So now comes Rav Sheshet, and it's a statement he said earlier, the same Rav Sheshet against the same Rav, not just any Rav. And he says, Amina kinai v'shachib Rav amar lahashmata. Rav must have been sleeping when he says this, because what he says goes against an explicit braita. And it was the exact same thing he did previously, where he also said Rav must have been sleeping, because it's a braita that says against what he said. It was the exact same structure in that sugya. We said there were two different interpretations, whether this is a sign of respect, saying, well, if the only way I can explain why Rav would have said something so preposterous is that he must have been sleeping and wasn't aware of what he was saying, or what kind of a ridiculous statement is this? Out of disrespect, almost, you must have been sleeping. How could you possibly say this? In any case, let's see the braita that he brings. So, Tanya, it says in a braita, chusha b'shmina, if the animal was thin, and then it was lean, and then it fattened up. Mishalem tashlume kefel v'tashlume arba v'chamisha ke'en sheganav. Then we go back to the way it was when you stole it, the lower amount. So how could that be? That goes explicitly against Rav. To which the Gemara answers, Amri mishum da amrle ana patimna va'at shakalt. Because if I stole your animal and I fattened your animal up because I fed it lots of food and now it's worth more, well, I could say to you, hey, I invested money in this animal. I made this animal worth more. You can't make me compensate you for that. Of course, I don't have to pay that. So, second source, Tashma, another source, Shmeinavi Klisha, the flip case. If it was full and fat, and then it got lean and weak, because what happened? I worked the animal very hard and I didn't feed it very well. Second braita, this seems to go exactly against Rav. It says you pay based on the original price, even if it changed in price. Well, Hatamnami, same exact answer. We're going to explain Rav and say, well, that's different because Mishum de Amrina le malikat lekula malikat lepalga. Well, if you remember, I said that when it comes to tvicha mechira, what do? We do it based on the price it was right before you slaughtered it. If I start weakening your animal from day one, I start hitting it and I start not giving it any food, well, basically what they're saying here is, what's the difference if you kill the whole animal? What's the difference if you partially kill the animal? I'm basically starting to kill the animal by mistreating it. So if I mistreat the animal and it starts to get weaker, it's no different than if I slaughter the animal. Now, if we slaughter the animal, then we take it based on the amount, the price it was before I slaughtered it. Likewise here, if I make the animal weaker, we're going to go by the price it was before I made the animal weaker, which would be likely at the moment I stole. At the moment I stole really means before it got weaker at the previous price while it was still fat and full and healthy. So basically, these two sources don't really go against Rava. And then we say, Kika Amar Rav, don't go against Rav. Kika Amar Rav, what Rav really meant was biyokra v'zolu kamar. He was talking about price fluctuation, not that the animal went up or down in value because I invested in it or I mistreated it. That, of course, is not going to change anything in terms of what I pay. I'm going to have to pay the original. But, and only the original if I invested, let's say I made it worth more. But biyokra v'zola, if the price fluctuates, price of animals changes, right? We know prices all the time fluctuate. If the prices fluctuate, that's what we're talking about here. So now they say, well, still we're going to have a question. According to that, hechidami, what's the case? If we're going to say it was originally worth 1 zuz, now it's worth 4, and Rav is saying all I have to pay is the 1 zuz from when I stole it, keren she'en sheganav. Well, if we go that way, lema pliga de Rava de Rabba, are you going to say that Rav disagrees with something Rabba says? Rabba seems to say that that's not the case. Let's hear. To Amar Rabba, if I steal a barrel of wine from my friend, which was the case we just brought, it was worth 1 when I stole it. And then the price of wine went up and it's now worth 4 zuz. Tavra o shake, if I break it or I drink it, mishalem arba'ah. So if I steal your wine and then I break it and now it's worth 4, I pay 4 based on the price it is now. Now that's not what Rav said. Rav said, right, if you break it, you pay the original price. If it's 1 and goes up to 4, well, you have to pay as 1. And Rabba says you have to pay 4. Now, the continuation isn't as important, but we'll do the continuation also. If it breaks on its own, mishalim zuza. But if I did something to it, which is like tavachu machal, where I basically ruined your animal, killed it and sold it, so that would be the case Rav was talking about, and there it would be based on the time I stole it. So here seems to be no, it's based on the higher price. So the Gemara answers, Amre kika amarav, ki going to be ikara shavi arba'a, ulevasov shavi zuza. We now limit Rav. And we say that Rav said, if I steal something and it fluctuates in price, depends. If it fluctuates and it goes up in value, then you actually pay the higher value. But if it fluctuates and goes down in value, let's say it was worth 4 and now it's worth 1, you're going to have to pay the higher price of the 4. So if I steal it, I have to pay 4. What do you see here? So you see 2 things. Number 1, what we say, the thief always has the underhand. They're always going to have to pay the higher price. Whether it goes up or whether it goes down, they're going to pay by whatever price is higher. So the second thing we see is that when Rav said the Karen you're going to pay when you pay the principal, it's based on the original price. That's assuming that the prices went down after that. The prices went down, you have to pay by the original value, whereas the kefel and the arba v'chamisha are going to go by what the price is at the time of the judgment, okay, or just before you slaughtered it, even if it's a lower price. So now the Gemara, so we've now narrowed down Rav. Okay, so let's read it again. When Rav says it, it's when Ikara Shavya Arba'a, Ulevasav Shavya Zuzah. And then now we're going to explain Keren Ke'en Shaganav, the Keren you're going to pay based on the original price of 4, and Tashlum Kefel, but Tashlum Arba'a V'Chamisha, Kishat HaMadabadim, which is going to be only 1. You're going to pay based on what the price is now, when you stand for judgment. Now, that was all Rav. So what we did for Rav was, we had 2 questions on him, the Rav Sheshet asked from a braita. Then we answered the question by saying, oh no, that's talking about investment or depreciation based on the way the owner, the thief treated the animal. That was not what Rav was talking about. Rav was talking about price fluctuation, but within that we end up based on some statement of Rava saying it can't be Rav disagree with Rava, and therefore we modify Rav to say it's only if the price went up, if the price went down, you're going to pay the original higher price. Now we're going to bring a braita to try to prove Rav from this braita. Now we're going to get a little bit into some other things until we realize how this is going to prove it. Tani Rabbi Chanina l'siyui l'Rav. So he brings this braita to support Rav. So I'm watching your item, and then I claim that it was stolen, even though I really stole it for myself. I wanted to keep it. Vinishba, and I take an oath in court that it was stolen to exempt myself. Vehoda, but then I admit that I lied. So basically, I stole your item, but I come admit it in court. If I did that, ubao edim, and witnesses came later. If I admitted, confessed in court before the witnesses came, this is what we call modeh b'knas patur. I only have to pay what I stole. I don't have to pay the kefel, right? But there's more here besides just there's kefel. Okay, now we'll go and read this pasuk in the Torah. If you look in Vayikra, chapter 5, verse 24 and 25, it reads like this. If you swear falsely in court, and you pay back the value of it, so if I lied about stealing something, I said, oh, someone stole it from me, but really I stole it, and I pay the value of the item, the principal, I have to add a fifth to this price. Okay, I have to now pay you. Actually, a fifth is really a quarter. I'll tell you why right now. I've seen sugyot about this before. If it's, let's say, $100 what I stole, and then I pay a quarter more, that's 25. So I pay you 125. A fifth of 125 is 25. So it's a fifth once it's calculated the fifth, once you add it already. Called the outside fifth. So anyway, that's how you calculate a fifth, which is really a quarter. So now they say, I have to pay you not only the value of the item, I have to add a fifth. Okay, so I have to give you that. I'm not going to get to darshaning those words today. Now, in addition to, this is called an asham gezelot. I have to bring a guilt offering. Okay, there's a sacrifice I have to bring for this. We're going to get to the word ve'et soon. We'll have a whole drasham. So now we're going to have a 3-way machloket about this case. The first opinion says, if before the Eidim come, I admit in court, mishalem keren v'chomesh v'asham, so I still have to pay the keren, the chomesh, and the asham, bring the korban asham, no guilt offering. But I don't have to pay kefel. Why don't I have to pay the kefel, the double payment for stealing? Because there's no kefel if I admit it in court, because kefel is a knas, it's a penalty, and modeh b'knas patur, if I admit it, I'm exempt. Even though witnesses came later, since I confessed first, I'm exempt. If the witnesses come first, and then hoda, and then I admit it, then I pay the kefel and the asham, and then the chomesh. What about now? Here we're going to learn, if once I'm liable, the kefel payment, the whole question is going to be, do I still pay the chomesh, and do I still bring a korban asham? So according to this, I pay the kefel, I pay the asham, and the chumsho olelo bikfelo. The chomesh and the kefel payment overlap each other, meaning when I pay that extra amount of the chomesh, it counts as the chomesh and as the kefel, or when I pay the kefel, it counts as the kefel and the chomesh. Divrei Rabbi Yaakov. Now, we don't really understand this yet, but the Gemara, soon after we read the entire braita, is going to go back and understand Rabbi Yaakov and say that what they mean is that when the chomesh and the kefel are identical, it's the same amount that I have to pay for the double and for the extra fifth, which is really a quarter, which I know you're probably thinking, how could that possibly be? But when they're the same, and that's going to be the whole chop here, how could they possibly be the same? We'll get to it, don't worry. Right, simple mathematics, the whole, right, kefil is the whole amount, doubled, right? So one times the amount that you stole, and the chomesh is a quarter of the amount you stole. How could a quarter be equal to a whole? We'll get to that, creative mathematics today. In any case, he seems to say when they're equal to each other and you paid the kefil, and that also counts as your keren, then you've covered your keren, which also seems to imply, though, Rashi says later, Rashi's going to say on this, if it's not the same amount, that it can't count for the keren also. If you have to pay double and that's not the same as the keren, as the chomesh, is the fifth payment, which is the quarter, then we don't make, I call it a fifth because chomesh literally means a fifth. Then basically, once it's not the same amount that you're paying, it can't count for two things. And then you're going to have to pay kefil and you're going to have to pay the extra chomesh. Okay, it's hard to understand this before we really read it inside. So if you didn't get it yet, don't worry. Now turning to Amud Bet. Chachamim omrim, birosho uvechamishav. That's what it says in the pasuk. Okay, it says again, v'shilem oto, you pay it, birosho, which means the principal of it, v'chamishitav, and the fifth. So what do you learn from the fact that those two words are juxtaposed? Mamon hamishtalem birosh mosif chomesh. If you're paying only the keren, the principal, because there's no kefil payment, like for example, if you admitted before the witnesses came, then you would add chomesh. Mamon she'em mishtalem birosh em mosif chomesh. But if you're paying kefil, then you don't have to pay chomesh. Rabbi Yaakov said you have to pay chomesh. It's just they could overlap. But according to the rabbis, you don't even need to pay chomesh if you're paying kefil. It's either or. But notice, he doesn't say anything about the korban hasham. You would still bring the korban hasham according to the rabbis, even though you don't have the chomesh. Okay, so even though it looked like a package deal, keren, chomesh, and asham, he says you could have a case where there's no chomesh because you pay kefil instead, but you would still pay the asham. We're going to have to see where he gets that from the pasuk. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai omer, en chomesh v'asham mishtalem b'makom sheyesh kefil. Shimon ben Yochai says no. Once there's no chomesh, then there's no korban asham. Those two things go hand in hand because they're right near each other in the pasuk. The pasuk says if you pay the keren, then you and only the keren, meaning not kefil, then you don't pay, and then you pay chomesh, and then there's the asham. If you're going to not pay only the keren and you're going to pay the kefil also, then you're going to have to pay also. I'm sorry. Then you're going to be exempt. Sorry, I can't remember now what I was talking about. Which one? Try it again. If you are paying the kefil, then you don't pay the chomesh and you don't pay the asham. If you are not paying the kefil and you're just paying the principal, then kicks in chomesh and asham. They go hand in hand. So now we're going to go back to why we brought this, and then later we'll understand the rabbis and Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai's position. Katani mihat. In any case, it says here, chumsho olelo b'kfelo, divrei Rabbi Yaakov. So hechidami, what's this case? How could you possibly have, now we're going to finally get to, the quarter being equal to a whole? If it was originally worth 4 at the time that you stole it, and it's still worth 4 at the time that you paid for it. There's no way that you could say the chomesh could be the same as the kefil payment, because kfela arba'a v'chumsha zuza. You might be starting to get where we're going with this. But anyway, the kefil is going to be 4 because you have to pay double what you stole. And the chomesh, which is a quarter, even though it's called a fifth, again, I explained already why it's a quarter, you're going to pay a zuz. A quarter of 4 is 1. Luckily, they use very simple numbers here. Ella, so that can't possibly be it, because then they're not going to be the same amount. And Rashi points out here, if they're not the same amount, then it's not called chomesh. And that it would have to be the exact identical amount that it works as chomesh to be considered chomesh, that the chomesh will atone for you. Basically, the chomesh is like an atonement thing, that you have to add this extra amount for atonement. It can't count as that if it's not the same amount. Even if it's more, that doesn't work. So, elalav, it must be, to make yikara shavya arba'a, ulavasaf shavya zuza. It must be. The first, it was worth 4 originally. Then it went down to 1. Now, let's fit this in. We want to use this as a proof for Rav. Remember, Rav said the keren is paid from the original amount, and the kefil is paid from the amount it is at the time we have the judgment. So now it's going to work perfectly. Dikfela zuza, the kefil is based on what it's worth now, which is only 1. And chumsha, the chomesh, is based on the original, because the chomesh goes with the principal. The principal you pay based on the original amount, 4. Chomesh, a quarter of that is 1. So now you have the kefil is one and the chomesh is one, and that must be the case that the braita was talking about, that Rabbi Chanina brought, which is why Rabbi Chanina said this braita must prove alma keren ke'en sheganav and tashlum kefil v'tashlum arba v'chamisha kishat hamad abedin. The only way to explain this case, this braita, where you could have an overlap of 1 times the payment and 1/4 of the payment being the same amount, is if each payment comes from a different calculation, from the earlier or from the later date. I'm a Rava. Rava says, what are you talking about? This braita doesn't prove Rav. I can explain this braita in a totally different way. This might be a very unrealistic case, but in any case, well, imagine there is some way for this Rabbi Yaakov's position to happen. I'll explain it where it was originally worth 4. It's still worth 4. It has nothing to do with the case you're trying to prove. Now you tried to say, well, the kefil should be 4 and the chomesh is only 1. Well, what we have to do is figure out a way where the chomesh can get up to 4. How could that possibly be? If the chomesh is 1/4, how do we get it to 4? Right, which is 1/4 is 1. Well, he took an oath 4 times. 4 times he took an oath saying, I did not steal this. And then he admitted, oh, I was lying all 4 times. Now, there's 2 ways to read this. The commentaries have a debate. Is it that each time he admitted and then took an oath again? In other words, came to court, said, I swear I didn't steal this. Someone stole it from me. Then came to court and said, oh, I lied. And then comes to court again. Oh, by the way, that same money I was talking about, or that same item, yeah, really, it was stolen from me. I'm now taking an oath about it. And then come, oh, no, I admit, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that's one possibility. Or for whatever reason, I don't know why anyone would do this, but he took 4 oaths about it, saying, I swear I didn't steal it. I swear I didn't steal it. I swear I didn't steal it. And at the end of after he had done 4 oaths, he then came and admitted, by the way, I lied. So one way or the other, okay, and again, it's a debate which one you'd actually be liable 4 times chomesh, but you'd have to pay the chomesh 4 times because it's on each oath you have to pay 1 zuz. So now we found a case where you'll have to pay 4 zuz for the chomesh, and the kefil is also 4 because it's only 1 principal. All the oaths were all talking about 1 item, so it's only 1 item to return, and the principal and the chomesh payment, which is 4 times the 1, and the kefil payment, which is 4, are now going to be the same amount. So Rava says you can't necessarily prove it from here because I have a way to explain it. And he even says further, how do I know that you could pay for multiple chomeshes, multiple fifths on 1 item? Well, HaTorah amra chamishitav. It's a very strange word, chamishitav. It should say chamishato, a fifth of it, but it says chamishitav, which means plural chomeshes, which means, right, plural fifths, which means the Torah rikta chamishiyot harbe b'keren echad. You could have a case where you pay multiple fifths on 1 principal item. Okay, so that was all, again, 2 braitot to go against Rav, 1 braitot to try to prove Rav. Everything gets resolved in the end, right? Either the proof isn't a proof, the questions aren't questions. We reject all our possibilities of what we were trying to suggest here. But in the meantime, we quoted this braita. Now we want to understand the opinion of the rabbis and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and what's their machloket about. Chachamim omrim berosho v'chamishitav. Mamon mishalem berosh, mosif chomesh. This is just a quote. Mamon that you pay the keren of, you add chomesh. Mamon she'em mishalem berosh. If you don't pay only the principal, but you also pay kefil, ein mosif chomesh. You don't add this fifth. Aval Asham maite, but you would still bring the korban asham. That's the assumption that comes out of the rabbi's opinion. So now they're going to ask, we don't understand. If you're not going to pay the chomesh, it's because it appears in the pasuk, birosho, when you pay the keren, then also you pay the chamishitav. Well, asham nami lo mishalim dahaktiv, birosho v'chamishitav ve'et ashamo. But also the asham you wouldn't need to pay because the next pasuk says, and the asham, which obviously connects it to the previous pasuk, or maybe not so obviously, but that's the question. And therefore, if you don't pay the chomesh, then you shouldn't have to bring the korban asham either. So Amar lecha Rabbanan et paskekra. The rabbis say et separates. The et is coming to say, and by the way, it's in the next pasuk. This is different. This isn't connected to the previous. Okay. To which Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who thinks it is connected, ve'et arveka. He says, what do you mean? It says and et. And comes to say and is connected to the previous sentence. So that's why Rabbi Shimon Yochai says, as soon as there's no chomesh, then there's no sacrifice. The Rabbanan, the rabbis, Amrelach, will say to you, Lo lichtav rachmana lo vav velo et. You just, if you really wanted to say the two psukim are together, then you could have just continued, and you didn't need to write vav, et, any of it. The fact that it says it must mean it's coming to separate. Rabbi Shimon Yochai Amrelach, et lo saged lo katav la afsuke be mamon gavoa le mamon idiot. No, you needed to have the et because you can't put in the same mouthful a payment that you're giving to a person and a sacrifice that you're bringing to God. So that's why you needed the et to separate between them. Therefore, that's why the vav then is coming to say, but now we're bringing them back together. Okay, so when they had to be separated, the et was necessary. The rabbis are saying if you really wanted them all to be together, you wouldn't need the et. The et must be separating. Rabbi Shimon Yochai says no. The et is there to say we have to separate these two because one is to God and one is to humans. But once it's there, now we're going to bring the vav to bring them together to say, but the obligation is one dependent on the other. Okay, so that was all a finishing up of a braita that we brought to try to prove Rav, and we can close that section, although we will connect to it as we go on. So I'm a Rabbi Il'ah. So after learning about Rav, now we're going to see something Rabbi Il'ah says. He's talking about a bit of a different case, but he says the following: Ganab tale v'naseh ayil, ega v'naseh shul. Okay, you buy a lamb, and then, you steal a lamb, and then it becomes a ram. This is an age thing. As soon as it becomes a little older, it turns into a ram. It's called something different entirely. Or you buy a calf and it becomes a full-grown shore, a bull. So na'aseh shinoi biyado ukna'o. Comes Rabbi Il'ah and he says, this is a change in the animal. It matured, became something else. Okay, even though it's the same animal, but it has a new name. It's a different stage of maturity. And now it belongs to the one who stole it. It wasn't me, it belongs to the one who stole it. So there's two different opinions about how to read this. Some people say that what this means is that at this point, we're going to see the next sentence, they're going to explain another ramification. It could be that's the only ramification, or it's possible to read it also as once it becomes, let's say I steal your animal and it grows up, it becomes mine to the extent that I don't have to return the animal anymore. I only have to return the value of the animal. Okay? And then the question is going to be also at what value? Okay, but basically, if I stole it and it becomes mine, then basically what I stole is, what I have to return is what it was at the moment I stole it. Because once it becomes mine, the fact that it goes up in value or increase, right, it got older, it's something else now, and it's worth more, it's irrelevant because it's already mine. So any development it has in my property, it's my development. I just owe you from the time of the theft. Perhaps that's what it means. Some people think, no, you still would have to, if the animal is still in existence, you'd have to return the animal itself, even though it's now something else. But, and this everyone agrees is the second ramification, the question is just, is it the second or is it the first? Because is the first thing what I just said not necessarily the case? But in any case, this is the key part, tavach umachal. If I slaughter it and sell it then, once it becomes mine, when I steal it, what, again, I stole it and then it grew up. So once, at the moment it grows up, it becomes mine. Now that it's mine, if I slaughter it and sell it, well, I'm slaughtering and selling my own animal. So I don't actually have to pay you 4 or 5 times the amount. I only have to pay you the kefel, right? The principal, the kefel. But I don't have to pay you that higher amount. And then whether or not this means that I have to pay you, the value of the animal now, or maybe I have to pay you the value of the animal from before when it was young, that's another, like I said, that's a debate among the commentaries how to read Rabbi Il'ah. But the main point is there's no tvicha and mechira at all because the animal is owned by me. Because once it changes its status, it becomes mine, and then I'm no longer liable for slaughtering it and selling it. Rabbi Chanina Rabbi Il'ah comes in Rabbi Chanina and he says, just like he tried to bring a proof for Rav, here's going to bring a question from braita that's explicitly against Rabbi Il'ah. Ganav talev v'nasa ayil, ega v'nasa shul. Exactly our case. The animal grew up after I stole it. Mishalem tashlumei kefal v'tashlumei arba v'chamisha. You already see the difference. You pay arba v'chamisha and kefel. Kefel you agree with, but arba v'chamisha no. Ke'en sheganav. Value based on the time at the time it was stolen. This, by the way, disagrees with Rav. We'll get back to that later, not today. But at that point, this braita makes is not with Rav, because Rav said arba v'chamisha go based on Hamada B'din, the later stage. And this talks about the earlier stage, but that's a side point that we'll get to later. Right now, the main point is, so I don't confuse you too much, it says here there's clearly arba v'chamisha payments. So, if you say the thief acquires it as soon as it changes, well, amay mishalem, shalahu tovech, shalahu mochil. You shouldn't have to pay at all. I shouldn't have to pay. I'm killing and selling my own animal. Amarle ve'elamai. So Rabbi Il'ah gets back to him and says, so what are you trying to say then? Shinoi lo kane? You think that shinoi doesn't make it acquired by me, the thief, because you don't think it's right? If it's acquired by me, then you wouldn't have to. You would if it's acquired by me, you wouldn't have to pay Arba Chamisha. And you're saying this shows it's not acquired by me. Well, if that's the case, if I didn't acquire it, then Amay Mishalem Mashaganav L'Shalem Kihashta. If I didn't acquire it, then I should have to return the animal as it is now. I stole an animal, I return the animal as its value now. The only reason why I would only have to pay based on what it was then is because I acquired the animal. And then I pay you based on what it was before it became mine. So what you're saying doesn't jive. There's a problem in your braita. And basically what he's saying is this braita is clearly wrong. And therefore don't question me from a braita. So comes Rabbi Chanina to support his braita. Amarle. Ki hashta hainu tama de lo mashalim, mishum de amarla, Torah gan ve'mimach, dichra gan ve'mimach. The reason why you don't have to pay the value it is now is because I could say, I didn't steal a ram, I stole a baby lamb. I didn't steal a bull, I stole a calf. Why should I have to pay you for a higher priced animal when that's not what I stole? And that's why Rabbi Chanina thinks that you're going to only have to pay the earlier price. So now, again, we're going to have this back and forth. Amarle, Rachmana nitzla mehai data. So Rabbi Il'ah says to him, God save us from your opinion. And Amarle, to which Rabbi Chanina responds, Adarabah, what do you mean the reverse? What do you mean? It's the reverse. Rachmana nitzla midata didach. God should save us from your opinion. Okay, they're each very strong in their opinions and think God save us from people who translate things the way you do. Okay, now, there's different ways to understand Rabbi Chanina. Right? Rabbi Il'ah seems to make it very clear. You own it because you own it. After you steal it, right? After it changes status, it becomes yours. And then since it's yours, so there's no Arba Chamisha. Rabbi Chanina either holds it's not yours at all, in which case we have to understand, so why, and that's why you pay Arba Chamisha. Why Ke'en Sheganav? Well, that's because you can claim, right? You have no proof. I didn't steal a ram. I stole a baby animal. Why should I have to pay any more than that, even though it's changed? Or you could actually say it is a change. It's just that it's not enough of a change to change over ownership. In other words, yes, there's a change in the animal, but we don't change owner. Like that doesn't mean, and this is something we're going to see now. We're going to see, we're going to go on about this, but it's possible to view that source as there is change. But just because the animal changes doesn't mean, and this is again a weird assumption for us to fathom, and this is really what we're talking about a lot in our section about theft, that when I steal something, if I change it, it becomes mine. That's a certain assumption. Maybe it doesn't really become mine. Maybe it doesn't become mine to the extent that all of a sudden I'm exempt from Arba v'chamisha payment. That's a bit of a weird thing, right? So the question is, what kind of change is actually very effective? And once you say the change is effective, how effective is it? To what extent do I acquire rights to this item? Okay, is it that I don't have to return the original item anymore? Is it that there's no Arba v'chamisha payments? Or maybe we view this as a change, but it doesn't mean I acquire it as the robber. So now the Gemara is going to go off on a bit of a question here. Matkefla Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera questions the following. Against Rabbi Chanina, who doesn't seem to think that this change causes the ganav, right, the thief to acquire it. He seems to say there is no, right, we don't pay attention to this change. To which he says, you might not think this animal changed into something else, but it has a new name now. And shinoi shem usually also causes change of ownership, right? Like if I have something and then it's called something else, already that usually gives me rights to say, well, now it's mine. So again, what does it mean it's mine? It doesn't mean I can keep it. Again, it might mean I can keep it and I only have to return the value of it. But I clearly stole something and it's clearly not mine. It's just that I now have, right, we've learned also, I assume responsibility for it and things like that. So now he says, Shul b'shinoi Hashem. So why not? Amarava, shul ben yomo karoi shul, ayil ben yomo karoi ayil. So actually, people call a bull, even a baby bull, and people call even a baby ram, right? It's usually called a lamb, but it's also called a ram. How do we know this? Well, shur ben yomo karoi shul. We see it in the Torah. Shur kesef oez ki yivaled, and that has to be 8 days under its mother before you kill it. So there you have, before you can use it for a sacrifice. So shul, it's called a shor, and it's just born. So there you see that a baby calf could be called a shor. When Yaakov is talking to Lavan, when he leaves his house and he says, I didn't take anything from you. What do you want from me? When Lavan comes looking for the trafim that Rachel stole, he says, I didn't eat any of the rams from your flocks. Now, the Gemara says, what? He didn't eat rams, but he did eat the lambs or the baby goats or the kids, right? So to which obviously the word ayil just included all different types, all different ages, and therefore you see that even at a young age. So it's not really shinoi shem. What really the issue is the maturity, right? It changes kind of into a different kind of animal where it goes into a new stage, right? So anyway, okay, so that's how we could explain Rabbi Chanina. But now the question becomes, right, so Rabbi Chanina doesn't view this as a change because even the maturity he doesn't think is an issue, and he doesn't think the name is an issue. So he doesn't really view this as change unless we see maybe change partially, but not enough to turn this into the ownership of the thief. Now the Gemara says, now it's true that Rabbi Il'ah was dismissive of this braita of Rabbi Chanina and said, clearly your braita is wrong. However, but the truth is that braita is still difficult to Rabbi Il'ah. It's hard to say. And the reason it seems hard to say that it's just throughout the braita is because we actually hold by that braita. So we're back to figuring out how we can, or not that we hold like it, but that it, right, it's a good question. We can't hold by it because we're going to now say it's Beit Shammai, but for whatever reason, they don't want to just throw out the braita. So now the Gemara is going to say, how can we resolve this contradiction of the braita to Rabbi Il'ah? Now, Rabbi Il'ah just dismissed it. But we want to figure out, if he doesn't dismiss this braita and throw it out, erase it, tear it up, what can he do with it? To which Rav Sheshet answers, Amar Rav Sheshet, Hamani Beit Shammai. We can just say it's Beit Shammai's opinion. Beit Shammai holds to Amrei. Shinoi b'mkomo omed v'lo kani. You could have a shinoi. And this is what I said before. You could say this is a shinoi. It really did change into a different animal, but it doesn't mean that the thief acquires it just because there was a change in it. Ditanya, how do we know Beit Shammai holds this? Natana be'ednena. If a man gives a prostitute a gift, the Torah says you're not allowed to bring it as a sacrifice. Okay, it talks about an et zona and a mechir kelev. Okay, the price you get for buying a dog that you sold your dog for, that money, either a prostitute's gift or payment, you could say, or the amount of money for selling a dog, didn't like dogs in those days, you cannot bring to Beit Hashem Elokecha l'chol neder for any vow that you have. Ki to'avat Hashem Elokecha, this is despicable to God. Gam shnehem. We're going to get back to this word gam. Also, both of these. Okay. Also is a bit of a strange word. Just could have said Ki to'avat Hashem shnehem. Why do you need to say also? And now the Gemara says Natana be'enena. If you gave her chitin v'asan solet, you gave her wheat as a gift, and she turned them into flour. Zaitim, you gave her olives, asan shemen, and she turned it into oil. Olive oil, anavim, vasanyayin, grapes, and she turned it into wine. Tanichada asur, tanichada mutar. One braita says you cannot bring this on the altar. You can't use it for a wine libation, for a meal offering. But tanichada mutar, different braita says you can. Now, why can you? Because you've changed it, right? And in changing it, she's now acquired it. It's no longer a gift for a prostitute. It becomes her own. So now, Amar Rav Yosef, Tani Gurion de Me'aspolek. Okay, Gurion was the name of a person from Asporek. It was a place where he came from. Beit Shammai Osrin, Ubeit Hillel Matirin. So he says the one who says Asur is Beit Shammai. The one who says Mutar is Beit Hillel. My time to Beit Shammai. Dichtiv gam l'rabot shinuyehem. The word also comes to say even if you change it, it still originated as a gift for a prostitute, cannot be brought on the altar because even though shinoi changes it, doesn't matter. It's still part of the original. It's still like the original item, which goes to tell you here, just like that braita. The braita said, you change it, right? The animal grows up. It's a different name. It's a different thing. It doesn't matter. It's still the original animal that you stole, and therefore it's not yours. It's not acquired by the thief. Beit Hillel says hem v'lo shinuyehem, because it says gam shnehem, the two of them, then comes to tell you even, right, only them in their original state. Once you change them, you acquire them, there's something new. And that is Rabbi Il'ah. And Rabbi Il'ah basically will say then, they're answering for him, the braita that was against him, instead of just pushing it aside and saying that's a wrong braita, you can just say it's Beit Shammai's opinion. And then you have a way to resolve it. Okay, quick review of our daf. We started with, okay, we ended with that drasha. How could you do himatzeh timatzeh to learn those other two things in the braitas if it's used for a different drasha? And we explained why you could actually learn both. Then we moved to this statement of Rav, Karen Kain Shkanav, like Hamadabadin. Each one is assessed a different amount. We had two sources that seem to go against. We then said, no. Rava is talking about price fluctuation. But even within price fluctuation, we had to say only when the price goes down, you have to go by the original price. The price goes up, you're going to have to pay the higher price. Then we said, maybe we have a braita that can support this opinion of Rabbi Yaakov, because how else could you have a quarter being a whole unless we deal with different things are assessed at different price, at the price for now and the price for later. That would be the principal versus the kefil. But we said in the end, that doesn't necessarily prove it because we had a different way of coming up with Rava said, I can explain that braita differently. Then we got off on the two opinions that disagree with Rabbi Yaakov and that braita, explained them. And then we got to Rabbi Il'ah, who talks about what happens if an animal grows up and becomes a different form of that same animal, but called something different and more mature. Is that considered a change? According to him, that actually acquires it by the thief, and then they no longer have to pay Arbav Chamisha. Rabbi Chanina throws a braita at him. They have this debate, and they all kind of get angry at each other and say, your braita is no good, and your opinion's no good. But then the Gemara figures out how to attribute the braita to Beit Shammai, in which case Rabbi Il'ah could say, that's Beit Shammai, we just don't hold that. And with that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and a Shavua Tov, and hoping for B'sorot Tovot, good news on all fronts.